It was the end of a world shattered by war, by devastation, by the collapse of empires and the rise of new powers. In the ruins of Europe, in the ashes of Asia, and in the aftermath of the Second World War, the global economy stood on the brink of chaos. Currencies had been devalued, trade had been disrupted, and trust in financial systems had been severely shaken. But out of this destruction, a new order was about to be born, one that would shape the next century. In 1944, a group of the world's most powerful nations gathered in a small town in the United States' Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. This was no ordinary meeting. This was a defining moment in history, a turning point that would determine the fate of global finance for decades to come. The leaders of the Allied powers, Britain, the United States, and others, came together with a single mission: to rebuild the world's economic system in a way that would prevent the disasters of the past from repeating. At the heart of this gathering was the United States. By the end of the war, it had emerged as the sole superpower, its economy intact, its industrial capacity unmatched. The US had not only survived the war, but had grown stronger. It held the largest gold reserves in the world, and its currency, the dollar, was seen as a symbol of stability and strength. It was here at Bretton Woods that the US dollar was quietly positioned as the foundation of a new global financial system. The Bretton Woods Agreement established a framework where the US dollar would be the primary currency used in international trade and finance. It was pegged to gold, and other currencies were pegged to the dollar. This system was designed to ensure stability, to prevent the kind of hyperinflation and economic chaos that had plagued the world in the 1930s. But this was not just an economic decision. It was a geopolitical one. The US had the power to shape the system, and it did so with a vision that extended far beyond the immediate needs of the post-war world. The dollar was not just a currency, it was a tool of influence, a means of ensuring that the US would remain at the center of global economic power for decades to come. Yet, even as the dollar rose to prominence, the question remained: was this dominance purely economic, or was there something more at play, something deeper, something more strategic? The US had not just survived the war, it had thrived. While much of the world lay in ruins, the American economy was booming. Factories were running at full capacity, industries were expanding, and the US had become the largest and most powerful economy in the world. It was not just the size of the US economy that made the dollar attractive. It was the stability, the reliability, and the confidence that came with it. In the years following the war, the US became the economic engine of the world. Its industries were at the forefront of innovation, and its financial system was seen as the gold standard of global finance. Other countries, still recovering from the devastation of war, looked to the US as a model of economic strength and resilience. They needed a currency that could be trusted, one that could facilitate trade and investment without the instability that had plagued the world in the past. And so the dollar became the currency of choice for international transactions. It was used in trade agreements, in foreign investments, and in the reserves of central banks around the world. The US dollar was no longer just a national currency, it was a global standard. But was this success purely economic? Or was there another force at work, one that had been quietly shaping the rise of the dollar from the very beginning? As the world began to rebuild, it became clear that the US was not just offering an economic model, it was offering a system of control, a system that would ensure that the US remained at the center of global finance for as long as it wanted. Yet, even as the dollar solidified its position, a new question began to emerge: what role did global institutions play in maintaining the dollar's dominance? The Bretton Woods Agreement was more than just a financial decision. It was the birth of a global financial infrastructure that would shape the world for decades to come. At the heart of this system were two institutions, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank. These organizations were created to ensure economic stability and to provide financial assistance to countries in need. But they also served a deeper purpose, to reinforce the dominance of the US dollar in the global economy. The IMF and the World Bank were designed to be under the influence of the United States, ensuring that the dollar remained the primary currency used in international trade and finance. Central banks around the world began to hold large reserves of US dollars, not just for trade, but as a hedge against inflation and economic instability. These reserves became a form of power, a way for countries to maintain confidence in their own economies while relying on the US financial system for support. But this was not just about economics, it was about influence. The US had created a system where the dollar was not only the most powerful currency, but also the most entrenched. It was embedded in global institutions, in trade agreements, and in the financial strategies of countries around the world. Yet, even as the dollar became the backbone of the global economy, it was clear that this dominance was not just economic, it was also political. And that brings us to the next question. How did the US military presence and geopolitical influence shape the dollar's global role? In the years following World War II, the United States did not just build a new economic system, it built a new global order, and at the center of that order was the US military. With a network of military bases spanning the globe, the US had established a presence that no other nation could match. From Europe to Asia, from Africa to the Middle East, American forces were stationed in strategic locations, ensuring that the US remained the dominant power in the world. This military presence was not just about defense, it was about control, it was about ensuring that the US could project its power, enforce its interests, and maintain the stability of the global system that it had helped to create. And with that power came influence, not just in the political sphere, but in the economic one as well. The US dollar became the currency of choice in international trade, not only because of its economic strength, but also because of the US military's ability to enforce its use. Countries that wanted to trade with the US or with other nations that aligned with American interests had to use the dollar. It was the currency of choice for oil, for technology, for investment, and for global finance. But was this dominance purely economic and political? Or was there a deeper system at work, one that ensured the dollar's place at the center of the global economy for decades to come? As the US continued to expand its influence, it became clear that the dollar's dominance was not just about power, it was about control. And that brings us to the next question. What are the hidden costs of this dominance? The dollar's dominance came with a price that was not always visible, but one that had far-reaching consequences for the global economy. As the US dollar became the world's primary currency, it also became the currency of choice for global debt. A significant portion of the world's debt is denominated in US dollars. This means that countries around the world borrow in dollars, not in their own currencies, and when they do, they become dependent on the US financial system for repayment. This dependence creates a kind of economic imbalance where the US holds a disproportionate amount of power over the global economy. For many developing nations, this dependence can be a burden. When their economies struggle, they must rely on the US to provide loans or support, and when they do, they often find themselves in a cycle of debt that is difficult to escape. The US dollar becomes a tool of influence, a way to maintain control over the global economy. But this is not just about debt. It is also about the way the US financial system is structured. The dollar's dominance means that the US has the ability to shape global economic policies, to set the terms of trade, and to influence the direction of the world economy. Yet, even as the dollar's dominance brings economic imbalances, it also raises a critical question: is the dollar's power sustainable in the long run? The US dollar's dominance is not just the result of economic strength or political power, it is the result of a complex and deliberate system of control. A system that has been built over decades, reinforced by institutions, supported by global trade, and maintained through the influence of the United States. At the heart of this system is a network of financial institutions, economic policies, and geopolitical strategies that ensure the dollar remains at the center of the global economy. The US has used its influence to shape the rules of the international financial system, to dictate the terms of trade, and to ensure that the dollar remains the preferred currency for global transactions. This system is not just about control, it is about stability. The US has created a framework in which the dollar is not only the most powerful currency, but also the most reliable. It is used in international trade, in foreign investments, and in the reserves of central banks around the world. It is the currency of choice for oil, for technology, for global finance, and for economic power. But this system is not without its challenges. As the world changes, as new economies rise and new technologies emerge, the dollar's position in the global economy is being tested. The question is not just whether the dollar will remain dominant, it is whether the system that has supported its dominance will continue to hold. And that brings us to the next question: what is the future of the US dollar in a changing global economy? The future of the US dollar is no longer guaranteed. As the world becomes more multipolar, as new economic powers rise, and as new technologies reshape the global financial landscape, the dollar's dominance is being challenged in ways that were once unthinkable. The rise of other currencies, particularly the euro and the Chinese yuan, has already begun to shift the balance of global economic power. These currencies are gaining traction in international trade, in foreign investment, and in the reserves of central banks around the world. They are no longer just regional currencies, they are emerging as alternatives to the US dollar. At the same time, the rise of digital currencies is creating a new frontier in the global financial system. Cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum are being used for international transactions, for cross-border payments, and for investment. These digital currencies are not tied to any single nation or government, and they are not controlled by any one institution. They are decentralized, borderless. This shift is not just a change in the way money is used. It is a fundamental transformation in the way the global economy operates. It is a challenge to the system that has supported the dollar's dominance for decades, and it is a sign that the world is moving toward a more decentralized and multipolar financial system. Yet, even as the dollar's position is being challenged, the US still holds a significant amount of influence in the global economy. The question is not whether the dollar will remain dominant, it is whether it will remain the dominant currency in a world that is becoming increasingly diverse and complex. And that brings us to the final question: what would a new global currency look like, and how might it challenge the dollar? Imagine a world where the US dollar is no longer the dominant currency. A world where the global economy is no longer centered around a single nation, a single currency, or a single financial system. A world where the flow of money is more decentralized, more democratic, and more reflective of the needs and desires of the global population. This is not just a hypothetical scenario, it is a possibility that is becoming increasingly real. As new technologies emerge, as new economic powers rise, and as new financial systems are created, the global economy is beginning to shift away from the dominance of the US dollar. What might this new system look like? It might be a currency that is not controlled by any single government or institution. It might be a currency that is used by people, not just by nations. It might be a currency that is not tied to any one nation's economic or political power, but is instead based on a global consensus. This is not just about money, it is about power. It is about control. It is about the way the world chooses to structure its financial systems, its trade agreements, and its economic policies. The US dollar has been the backbone of the global economy for decades, but the world is changing. And with it, the future of the dollar and the future of global currency is being rewritten.